Right, okay, and now, of course, I can't get the slideshow working. There we go. Perfect, good. Okay, you can see that. Climate change, mining, and the energy intensity connection, or it's more complicated than we think. Oh, let's see if I can get to the next one. Yes, good. Okay, a little bit about YCS. This is the group I work for, and we're basically a grassroots environmental nonprofit. We've been established in 1968. I've just got something in the way here. There we go. We're basically older than Greenpeace, which we never tire of reminding them whenever we get a chance to interact with them. We consider ourselves the premier environmental group in the Yukon. Take that, CPAWS. Sorry, even though CPAWS does very good work. And we basically try to pursue ecosystem well-being throughout the Yukon. We do advocacy, education, research. We have an office in downtown Torse, at the corner of Hawkins and 3rd. And to our horror, CPAWS has just moved into a building opposite us. So now we're like environmental suburbs or something, I don't know. Anyway, it's kind of fun. We go over and they feed us and that sort of thing. A little bit about myself. I have a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering. I've been doing this job for at least a decade, and before that I did energy stuff for the Conservation Society. I've done a variety of things. When I first came up here, I slung bottles at Raven Recycling, giving refunds and all that sort of stuff. I was born in Scotland but raised in South Africa and came to Canada in '82. One of the side results of that is I have a very weird accent. I also tend to speak fast as well. So if you don't understand me, or if you want me to repeat or explain something, just put your hand up or just interrupt. Don't worry, I'm used to it. I have to point at menus in restaurants. Nobody can understand me. So anyway, that's a little bit about me. And this presentation, we're going to talk about the Yukon's greenhouse gas emissions. We're going to look at the mining emissions in the Yukon, and then a bit of a discussion about this whole energy intensity concept and why that's going to force the Yukon to make some difficult choices. The reason we're doing that is because, greenhouse gases are causing climate change. And just as a little reminder, I stuck a chart, it's called the Keeling curve, and it basically shows CO2 in the atmosphere going back, this one, 200 years, no, a couple of thousand years. You can go online and find, they've got very detailed charts, and it's very depressing to look at, but that's why we're having this conversation. Here's the Yukon's greenhouse gas emissions, and they've sort of broken it down by sector. If it's kind of hard to figure out how much mining is responsible for, we can sort of get a rough idea if we look at the off-road and exempt diesel and gasoline. But very, very roughly, we can say that the Yukon is probably producing about 600 to 700 kilotons of carbon dioxide equivalent a year. And it's a pretty safe bet to say about 10% of that is mining related, probably more, but we'll go with 10% just for ease of calculation. Does that all make sense? Any questions? You've probably seen these figures before, variations on them. I saw this one from the a government website somewhere. I can't remember which one. You're probably familiar with mining, but I always put in, just in case people aren't, we have two basic types of mining in the Yukon. We have hard rock, or quartz, where metal is part of the ore and must be removed by mechanical or chemical means. A good example of that is the Victoria Gold Mine up near Mayo. We've got the Minto Mine near Pelly Crossing, that's doing copper. There's another mine just north of Keno, actually within Keno, called it's run by Alexco, and they're getting silver and lead out of the ground. It's different from placer mining, where gold dust and flakes and nuggets, if you're lucky, are found loose in river gravel, and that's the main sort of mining that we see up in the Dawson region. Though placer mining occurs all over the Yukon, some of it happens in Mayo, there's some out of Haines Junction, there's even some around the Whitehorse area. So that's the two types of mining that occur.
Preet, do you have a question?
Yep. Sorry, Preet?
Oh, well, I'll just save it till the end. It's okay.
Oh, interrupt is fine. I'll probably forget.
Oh, I was gonna ask what the unit was that you showed on the previous graph. Yeah.
Oh, the kilotons of CO2 equivalent. Oh, I wish I had a good answer. If Stryker was here, he'd be able to blurt it out. But I think it's okay. So there's many forms of greenhouse gases, but the main one is carbon dioxide, CO2, and
Okay.
what they can do is take some of the other greenhouse gases. I'm just trying to think, methane's a really good one, but we don't actually release much methane, but it's much more intensive than carbon dioxide in being responsible for climate change. So
I
what they
see.
can do is they convert it to a carbon dioxide equivalent. So that's why you see that little E on the end, it's equivalent. So it's very easy and simple to talk about carbon dioxide. We're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, but there's a bunch of other gases in there as well, some of which are much worse than carbon dioxide. But for ease of expression and calculation, they convert everything to CO2 equivalent, which is
Okay.
what that E stands for.
Okay.
Make,
Thanks.
make sense? Okay.
Yeah.
I think, yeah. And also, yeah, I mean, a lot of this is, I think, I like to say I'm a bit of an expert in this, but I make mistakes left, right, and center, and it's always embarrassing when I get caught out. Anyway, it's very hard to get detailed project-specific reporting in the Yukon of the mining sector's greenhouse gas emissions. There isn't any real reporting process. When a mine is about to start up, it has to go through an environmental assessment process called YESAB, Yukon Environmental Social Assessment Board. And the more responsible mining companies do state in all the paperwork they put in, this is how much greenhouse gases or carbon dioxide equivalent our project's going to emit. And all the big mines, the quartz mines, the hard rock mines, they have been very good at saying, this is what we think it's going to be. The placer miners tend not to do it because there's no requirement for them to do it, which is very frustrating. So we don't really know exactly how much greenhouse gases are being emitted in an accurate measuring sense by the mining sector. We do have something called the Yukon Water Board that also looks at mining projects, but it is just focused on water. It doesn't really look at air emissions, which greenhouse gases are considered part of. So it's a big gap in our reporting. There are roundabout ways we can figure out some of the greenhouse gas emissions. We can look at how much gasoline or diesel mining companies are buying, and then you can do a calculation that assumes that if all that diesel is burnt in a generator or in a truck, you can then get gas figure. It's not super accurate, but it's better than nothing, and it's all that we've got at the moment. We talk about the Yukon being mining friendly and, you know, the wonderful mining jurisdiction, but a lot of it's just talk. We only actually have 3 major mines going in the Yukon, and I've circled them in red, though it came out sort of orange on the map. We've got the Eagle Gold Mine or the Victoria Gold Mine and the Keno Mine up near Mayo and Keno. And then we've got the Minto Mine in the center of the map there. That's near Pelly Crossing. We've got some proposed mines that will be starting up in the future. And the one next to the Eagle Mine at the top, that's going to be the Brewery Creek Mine. Going down a bit, we've got the Coffee Mine, which is going to be right next to what could be a mine, the Casino Mine, though it's still many years away from permitting. And then on the far right of the map, towards the bottom, we've got the Kutzakaya Mine. That's just been approved, though it's still quite controversial. It's in the middle of caribou habitat. One thing you'll notice when looking at this map, the red mines, the ones that are circled, they're quite close to the highways. So they can access our hydro system. They can get power from our various hydroelectric dams. So weirdly, even though some of them are quite big, they don't actually give off a lot of greenhouse gases because they're using hydroelectricity. If we look at the blue ones, some of them are quite far from the grid, the Coffee and the Casino Mine and the Kutzakaya Mine. They'll all be burning diesel or liquefied natural gas online. And if some of them come on stream, our greenhouse gases are going to go through the roof. We also tend to forget about all the abandoned mines we have in the territory. There's The Faro mine is the big one, but there's also some cleanup happening up at Keno. There's Mount Nansen near Carmax. We've got Clinton Creek downstream of Dawson, and there's also a mine called Wolverine that's near, sort of in between Ross River and Watson Lake. When we clean up a mine, we use a huge amount of energy, mainly bulldozers and backhoes and you name it, to shovel all the dirt around and everything. So to give you an example, the Faro mine, they're estimating, this is from a chart I stole off the internet, they're probably going to be doing about 75 kilotons of CO2 equivalent. Remember that very first chart we looked at? It sort of said, 600 to 700 kilotons of CO2 equivalent for the entire Yukon. And the mining's emissions, we think at the moment, are about 10% of that. Just by cleaning up the Faro mine, we're going to double the mining sector's greenhouse gas emission. So if currently we're doing about 70 kilotons of CO2 equivalent just with our current mining operations, chuck in the Faro mine and we double that. Mining is incredibly energy intensive and it releases a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. Sorry, I think Keegan's got his hand up.
I had one question. So I see like the Faro mine is a crazy amount, and you were referencing the 700 kiloton number, but that was a 2018 figure. Would you estimate that we've gone up a little bit over the last few years? Like most people seem to say that like over the last 4 years that we've only been going up. And I would think that, we could be closer to 800, maybe even 9 now.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's weird. It's tough to get decent figures, at least up-to-date figures. Figures tend to be 2, 3, even 4 years old, which is very frustrating. We've seen the huge population growth. I mean, I don't know, does anyone here live in Whistlebend? But I mean, just go to Whistlebend, you just see how it keeps sprawling and sprawling. All those houses are basically on electric heat, which in the summer is fine because it's surplus hydro. But in the winter, when they have to burn diesel or LNG down at the dam site, that all then becomes carbon intensive. We've also, up until quite recently, seen a bit of an uptick in the economy, like with mine exploration and things like that, in spite of COVID. So yeah, that also has raised, I think, greenhouse gas emissions. Now that we've adjusted to the COVID situation, tourism is back on the upswing as well. You've probably seen the tour bus and stuff, around downtown. And once again, that's a huge sort of contributor towards greenhouse gas emissions. So you're right. When we talk about these figures, these are very much lowball figures. As to what the increase is, I honestly don't know. We're going to have to wait for the next round of figures to come out, and they typically take 2 to 3 years to release. One thing we do know is that it's a gradual increase. As the population increases, you get sort of the nice gentle curve. What's bad is when the mine comes on stream and you get like a huge step jump. We're not there yet. At the moment, all we're probably seeing is a gradual increase. But yeah, these figures are out of date, and they're low, and I hesitate to say how low. Hopefully not by too much, otherwise all our calculations aren't worth much. Hope that answers it. Okay, good. Preet, do you have your hand up again?
Sorry, I think that's from before.
Oh, okay, sorry. I always do that as well.
Always
Okay.
curious.
Okay, good. Okay, right. Okay, then. So existing mine emissions. Let's have a look at the one on the bottom right. I'm sorry, I did a screw up on the layout, but see where it says table 7.2 project GHG emission rates. That's for Victoria Gold, and they're in the operations phase. So they're doing about 7 kilotons of CO2 equivalent. And the table on the left is the Minto, and I couldn't get figures for the Minto mines greenhouse gas emissions, but we do know what the diesel and gasoline and propane is. And off the top of my head, it's probably about 5 kilotons of CO2 equivalent. So it's not that much. This is because both of these operations are hooked up to the grid. So anything they can plug in, they plug in, and then they use, in the summer at least, hydroelectricity from the dams. They also do some quite clever stuff, like I know the Minto mine tends to shut down quite a bit in January. Can do maintenance. That means they're not dependent upon the hydroelectric grid for a lot of power, which is good because we're burning diesel and LNG at the dam. And also from a mining point of view, it makes sense. It's January tends to be our coldest month, and it's very harsh on equipment and employees. So by doing a minimal amount of work and just concentrating on maintenance, they can reduce wear and tear on people and machines. But so this just gives you an idea of the current greenhouse gas emissions associated with some of the current mines. So anywhere like 5-7 kilotons of CO2 equivalent is a rough guess. The problem comes with the new mines because they're all going to be off-grid. We've got the Coffee Gold Mine, which is going to be a big gold mine south of Dawson. We've got the Kudzakaya mine, which is in between Ross River and Watson. And then we've got the Casino mine, which will be next to Coffee. And you can just see the amounts of greenhouse gases insane. If we look at Coffee, that's like, if we look at year 8, 100 kilotons of CO2 equivalent. We look at Kudzakaya during the operations phase. This one, you have to assume, let's see, their total is 59 kilotons of CO2 equivalent, but the monster is Casino, if it should ever go. If you look at year 7 and year 8, we're talking about 716 kilotons of CO2 equivalent, which doubles the Yukon's greenhouse gas emissions, essentially. So it gets very frustrating when we have the Yukon government encouraging us to, get your personal greenhouse gas emissions down, here's some money to buy an electric bike, put in LED light bulbs, whatever. At the same time, we're encouraging a mining sector going to negate and undo any reductions that we do at the residential level. So if we want a mining sector, we're going to have to really think about how we power these operations, because as currently planned, these CO2 emissions are just going to undo anything and everything that we've been doing so far to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. When it comes to the placer mining sector, we're a little unclear about how much they consume. There's probably anywhere from 100 to 150 active placer operations in the Yukon, and these range from single person operations all up to some placer operations hire 10, 20 people. I don't know if any of you watch those horrible TV shows, Klondike Fever, Yukon Gold, that sort of stuff. You get the idea, those are the bigger operations, and you can see the type of equipment they use. I must admit, even though I despise placer mining, I do kind of like watching those shows. So it's, they do burn quite a bit of diesel and stuff. There's also this thing about the habitat destruction caused by mining activity. It releases greenhouse gases when you destroy a wetland or stir up a swamp or that sort of thing, or you strip off topsoil and vegetation and you let it break down and it releases methane as it rots on the ground. So we don't really have a good handle on how much that causes. This is going to be a tricky one to solve because when you've got 150 different operations scattered all over the territory, very far from the hydro grid, how do you power these sort of things in a manner that doesn't release greenhouse gas emissions? It's difficult. So our beloved government has come up with this idea called energy intensity. Basically, what it means is if we read the bit on the top right here, we will work with industry to set a target for greenhouse gas emissions from placer and quartz, yada, yada, yada. That will see Yukon mines produce fewer emissions of greenhouse gases across their life cycle for every kilogram or kiloton of material produced. It's a very interesting concept and it is utterly useless. Let's go to the next slide. So the whole idea is to get greenhouse gas emissions down, right? The mining sector will not have to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. They would do this energy intensity or emissions intensity. It means that if a mine is currently producing 10,000 ounces of gold and it emits 10 kilotons of greenhouse, oh, sorry, I made a typo there, of greenhouse gas emissions. So if they increase their production to 20,000 ounces of gold while emitting only 15 kilotons of greenhouse gases, their emissions intensity is down. They've doubled the amount of gold, but they've only increased their emissions by 50%. So 10,000 to 20,000, 10 to 15. The problem is the atmosphere doesn't care. Emissions have still gone up by that 5 extra kilotons. It should be going the other way. Instead, we're increasing it. Meanwhile, saying, "Oh, look how efficient the mining sector is." It's not correct. We should be reducing greenhouse gas emissions, not increasing them. Total greenhouse gas emissions continue to go up. Some of the proposed mines working their way through the regulatory and licensing system could dramatically increase the Yukon's greenhouse gas emissions, no matter how efficient they are. So we really have to question the current approach to mining emissions, because it will not reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Now, there is the argument that we need these metals, right? Here's something I stole off the internet somewhere. And it just shows like a lot of these minerals, for example, copper, iron, lead, neodymium, which is the proxy for rare earth metals, silver, all that sort of stuff, zinc, are used in what people are referring to the new green technology, the green economy. We need these metals if we all want, solar panels, wind turbines, electric vehicles, all that sort of stuff. So we then have this conundrum. Do we continue to destroy the atmosphere through emitting a lot of greenhouse gas emissions while getting these metals that will help us transition? And there's no guarantee that the metals that we extract will actually be used in green technology or in green items. It could very well end up as being the usual sort of consumer crap that we buy at Canadian Tire and Walmart. Just because copper is being mined in the Yukon doesn't mean it's going to end up in an electric vehicle. It could well end up as something completely frivolous and useless. So there's that concern. Even though a company might say, hey, copper's the best thing for the environment since sliced bread, there's no guarantee it'll end up being used in an environmentally friendly manner. There is also this idea that there's enough metal around that we can recycle our way out of the mining and climate change issue. When you recycle items, use a lot less energy. I think the figure that's typically put around, if you recycle a pop can, you're saving 90% of the energy than if you had to make aluminum from scratch. And it's a good example. And I'm not saying we shouldn't recycle. In fact, Raven Recycling, who I used to work for, has a very good recycling program. And on the right there, this is the price they pay for scrap metal, all sorts of different scrap metal, everything from bullet casings to old aluminum siding. Prices change regularly, so check in with them if you're thinking of selling some stuff to them. But given the amount of new stuff we're going to need for the green economy, and typically I'm thinking vehicles, and also the based on current consumption patterns and consumer population growth, and more importantly, the number of people who want to live like we in the Western world live, which is in a very wasteful consumer pattern, we don't have enough metal. And who are we to say that people elsewhere in the world cannot live like we live? So there's a whole bunch of ethical questions floating around there. But basically, recycling is important, but it ain't going to provide enough metal. There are some solutions, something called net zero mining. The picture on the left is an electric underground mining vehicle. Funnily enough, it's owned and operated by Newmont. They're the company who wants to do the coffee mine south of Dawson. This one, unfortunately, is in northern Ontario, a place called Borden. And they're very fortunate. They're right next to a hydro line, so they can hook into the grid. They can then just, instead of having diesel vehicles or gasoline vehicles, their whole site can use electric vehicles, which actually has a very positive safety feature because you're not emitting diesel fumes underground. There's less worries about people suffocating, all that sort of stuff. One weird quirk about using electric vehicles, though, is it's very easy to make them remote controlled. So I think it's the vehicle here. You can see, I don't know if a human is actually sitting in the cab. Somebody on the surface is driving it. So you get this weird situation where you start going high tech on your mine sites, you actually need less employees because somebody on the surface could perhaps be operating one or two or even three of these vehicles at one time, especially if there's just a simple operation they have to perform. It then gets even stranger. Why should the person operating the vehicle actually be on the mine site with a decent high-speed internet connection? Obviously, we're not talking the Yukon, but elsewhere in the world. With a decent high-speed internet connection, that operator can be anywhere on the planet. So why pay a Canadian, say, $200 an hour to operate something like this when there could be someone in Central America, Southeast Asia, and Africa who is just as qualified as any Canadian to operate one of these things remotely, and you can pay them $10 an hour. So we get this weird sort of thing by using electric vehicles. Yeah, it's great for the planet and stuff, but we raise a whole bunch of socioeconomic questions about outsourcing jobs and all that sort of stuff. You also get into this thing about autonomous vehicles that don't actually have a person controlling them. If they're on a very simple loop or circuit or for operations, you can just have a decent piece of computer software operating it. But zero greenhouse gas emissions. On the right, we see an example from the Diavik Diamond Mine in the Northwest Territories. They've actually put up a couple of wind turbines to help power their operation. They partly did it for environmental reasons, but they also did it for financial reasons. They only have a winter road accessing their site. So as soon as the winter road is firm enough, they had to truck in tons and tons of diesel to provide enough power for their generators to operate their various pieces of equipment and stuff. So by putting up wind turbines, they can reduce the amount of diesel they require, which is good for the planet and also is good for their financial bottom line because they don't have to store as much diesel on site, nor do they have to truck as much diesel there. Oh, question?
I have one question about like the electric mining vehicles. And I know like the electric vehicles always sound good, but one of my questions is do you just start like creating a cycle? Like, let's say we're mining for lithium with an electric vehicle, and now we're mining for that lithium, but now we need another mine to mine the lithium for those vehicles. And now we need another mine to mine the lithium for those vehicles. And does it just sort of like create a loop, especially when we know that it could be used elsewhere?
Yeah, you've actually raised a rather tricky question. Lithium mining is pretty destructive. As far as I know, there's no commercially available deposits in the Yukon. I think there might be some on the prairie somewhere, but lithium mining at the moment basically involves huge open pits, lots of water contamination, usual horror story. So yeah, everyone gets excited about electric vehicles, Teslas, yada, 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 all that sort of stuff. But you're right, the resources required to it are destructive in and of themselves, just from an environmental point of view. And at the moment, they're also quite energy intensive to get out. So we could well be we reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from the vehicle, but the mine itself, where we got the elements to make the vehicle, could be releasing a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. Nobody, or at least I don't recall seeing any studies. It would be something like full cost accounting type approach, where someone would have to sit down and say, okay, how much energy are we putting in to getting all the raw materials to make our nice clean green vehicle? And it might well end up to be, look, this isn't worth it. A lot depends on where the mines are happening, how the material is being extracted. You also get the strange thing about critical mass. The first couple of mines are probably going to be ecological horror shows, but then as the companies get expertise in how to do lithium, we'll use lithium as a there's lots of minerals, but as they get expertise in how to develop these mine sites, they might get better, but they might not. It's these great unknown questions. Nobody seems to have any firm answers, and I don't think in the short term we're going to get any firm answers because we just don't know. Unfortunately,
Yeah, exactly.
We're not very clever. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems to me like there's like personally, I find electric vehicles tend to in general be like a thing, like a mine. This mine having a lot of electric vehicles almost seems like they're sort of like greenwashing people. They're like, oh, but electric cars. We have electric trucks. We're the environmental mine. Don't look at us. Look at them. When in the end, it's electric cars are really not that much better. And the only reason electric cars sell is because it's a little bit better, and it means that people can still drive their car around.
Yes, there is the greenwashing approach. Actually, and the company that owns the one that's pictured, Newmont, in certain circles, it's called New Monster because they're so awful on a variety of fronts. But yeah, there is quite a bit of greenwashing, though I think in this particular case, because they got a sweetheart deal from the electric company in Ontario, Ontario Hydro, whatever it's called, it actually sort of makes financial sense from an operating point of view. But if every mine hooked up to the grid, the price of electricity would go through the roof, and there would probably be an electrical shortage. So, companies by and large just want to reduce their costs. If they can get their hands on cheap electrons, doesn't matter whether it's diesel or hydro or whatever, that's the route they'll go. Our trick is, from our perspective, is we've got to make sure those are green electrons. It raises the bigger issue of whether you raised it with, like, do we need these mines? And that's the question, do we need these mines? I mean, gold mining, for example, the vast majority of gold just sits in bank vaults. It's utterly useless. A very small amount is used in industrial processes, and a small amount is used as personal jewelry. But the vast majority just sits in bank vaults, and there's nothing apart from propping up the financial system. Yeah, and a lot of the metals that we mine end up as pointless consumer items. Anyway, we're consuming ourselves to death. Anyway, sorry. Okay, so if the Yukon wants to continue doing the mining as we're doing it, with a variety of mines scattered around the Yukon, and if we genuinely are serious about getting our greenhouse gas emissions down, we're going to have to figure out a way to get the mines running on what I'm going to call clean or green electrons. And traditionally in the Yukon, that has meant hydro dams. We've got, the dam at Whitehorse. We've got the big dam at Ajax. There's another dam up near Mayo on Mayo Lake. And we're starting to see the rise of small wind turbine and solar power operations. And we're going to be hooking into the hydro dam down near Atlin. These don't tend to produce a lot. They won't provide enough for all the mines we've got planned. So we're going to need some new dams. What you see on the map on the screen is Yukon Energy did a big study a long time ago of where potential new hydro dams could go. Those are the blue dots, the big ones. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't like dams, and with good reasons. Environmentally, they can be very destructive. They interfere with fish habitat, sometimes extremely negatively. They tend to flood valleys, and they tend to flood valleys that at the moment are very productive, whether you're a moose or caribou hunter. Wetlands often exist in them, and they're often just very beautiful. We tend to forget about the human aesthetic. Valleys are something, and then if you build a hydro dam, you flood it, you destroy it. So it is very unlikely that the Yukon will see any, for Yukon, in a Yukon context, big size hydro dams in the near future, which is sort of unfortunate because we're going to need a lot of electrons soon if some of these mines start coming on stream. There are other options out there. The Yukon government is talking a bit about geothermal. However, to do a lot geothermal to generate a lot of megawattage for the mines is going to be tricky. And there is even talk of something called a modular nuclear reactor, which in environmental circles rejoices in the name mini nuke. So it's there's a stylized picture of one on the right. The Alaskan military, the Alaskans are testing one at a military base near Fairbanks, and we'll see how that goes. They're sort of different from the big actors that we read about in the papers, and they're allegedly a lot safer, but there's no such thing as a free lunch. You still need uranium of some sort to power these things, and there will be some radioactive waste that has to be disposed of. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes. So where, if we go ahead.
Yeah, no, it seems like there's a lot of things. I guess the hardest part is, I think sometimes people get carried away, like the dams, like dams aren't great, but I think the reason everyone hates dams so much is just because it looks like it and you see the dam, but you don't you see the generators and it's like, oh, there's just a couple little boxes over there, and you don't really see that the same way you see like a river flooding, and us people do get. But
Yeah.
it would be interesting to see whether what sort of mines can be forced almost to hey, you need to be taking some of your power from the grid, or creating yourself
Yeah.
more grid.
There's a couple of weird suggestions floating around, not weird, just suggestions that should perhaps be considered. One thing that's come up is if you have a mine that's off the grid, say, and it has to burn diesel LNG to power its operations, they could do something called offsets. So yes, they burn diesel at their mine site, release a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, but maybe they should pay for a bunch of wind turbines or solar panels at the nearest community. So say, for example, the coffee mine is going to be off grid. Maybe they should be paying for a wind farm near Dawson. So Dawson can then greatly reduce the amount of diesel that's required to burn in winter. There's a bunch of alternatives out there that will still help reduce the Yukon's greenhouse gas emissions, even if the mining company is burning diesel on site. If they burn, say, for example, 50 kilotons of CO2 equivalent on site, but they've paid for a wind farm that makes 60 kilotons of CO2 equivalent of wind energy in winter, we've then got a sort of a bit of a reduction happening. So there are options like that, but it gets very convoluted very quickly. And then you start talking about how long's the mine going to last, all these sort of things. And then the mining company itself might say, well, okay, we paid for those wind turbines, we're taking them with us when we move, when we leave the Yukon. So there's different questions floating around there, but it certainly is something to think about. And the onus should be on the mining companies. Oddly enough, because they're very well financed. They have a lot of technical expertise, and they've done operations all over the world. So they should have a good idea of what forms of non-greenhouse gas emitting energy could be made viable in the Yukon. We tend to forget mining companies are experts at a lot of things. Some of the bigger ones, experts at creating their own energy in an environmentally friendly manner. Let's see what we've got next. Here's some examples of some quote unquote green energy that's used elsewhere in the world. On the left, we've got a geothermal plant. This Iceland basically is just one big active volcano, which means they've got a lot of geothermal heated water. The concept's very simple. You drill a hole in the ground, you bring up the boiling water, turns a turbine, generates electricity, which is great for something like aluminum smelters, which chew a lot of energy. So what's ended up happening is Iceland, which has virtually no aluminum or silica deposits of its own, has become a world aluminum creator because people ship the raw product there and use the very cheap energy to make a lot of aluminum. Sorry, Keegan.
I gotta remember what I was thinking of. Oh yeah, I just wanted to agree with your plan, your thought about people putting a mine putting in, because maybe if you're creating a mine in the middle of nowhere and all the equipment has to get trucked in on a mining road, it could be true that it's a lot harder to set up a solar farm or a wind farm, because then you're clearing more space in there. But it does make sense. Okay, so maybe they're burning their diesel out there, but that's okay with me because living in Whitehorse, I'm no longer burning any diesel up at the dam because we've now have extra energy from them. And oftentimes mines don't last. I don't know a lot about the lifespan of different mines versus solar panels and wind farms, but I feel like in some cases, I would think that a wind installation or a solar installation might last longer than a mine and keep giving back to the community after the mine's closed.
Yeah, no, you've hit on something. Mines in the Yukon tend not to last. The Wolverine mine lasted for 3 years. I think the Kutzukaya mine, they're talking, if it gets into operation, will run for 10 years. And to be honest, solar panels, 25 years, they last a long time. Actually, speaking of solar panels, check this thing on the right. It's a mine, I think, somewhere in Australia. And that's sort of the size of solar farm you need. And it probably doesn't produce all their energy, but we're talking big operations when it comes to solar farms for mines. But the idea of offsets makes sense. So instead of a mine putting up a solar farm on its own property, they pay for one to go up near Dawson, one to go up near Pelly, one to go up near Stewart Crossing. So they can do an offset that way. But solar panels require a lot of minerals to go into them as well. Ditto Iceland's geothermal stuff. So we're back into the question of we need resources to make green energy so we can extract more resources. Yeah, you go down the rabbit hole. Anyway, what else we got? Oh, that's it. Sorry. How are we doing for time? Oh, yeah, okay. If you've got any questions, here's my contact info. And just as a little aside, I think Preet already knows this, I am a stamp collector. And so we did a little bit of poking around, and here are some climate change stamps. Look at them and enjoy. And also, if anybody wants to trade stamps or has stamps to give me, just let me know. I'll be there. And that's it. Okay, questions. Preet.
Yes, I love the stamp collection, by the way. I was gonna say, very cool. I have a question. I don't know, you probably heard of like the De Beers mining company in, I think, NWT, and they, I watched a documentary, and so they put in this mine, but they basically like kind of decimated this community, and then during the remediation process, I'm just trying to remember, like they hadn't really fulfilled their promises of like giving back to the community, etc. So I might be wrong if it's necessarily like the De Beers company. I think it is. It was a while ago, but
yeah. Was it the Kaminik mine or something like that? I try to keep track of the NWT stuff, but there's so much happening there. It's complicated, but it's a pretty common story. Mining companies go in often with honestly the best of intentions, and then the money starts running short, and because the money runs short, they break all the promises they've made, especially to local communities, and then there's no money left for cleanup, and they skedaddle out of town, and so taxpayers are on the hook to clean up the mess. It happens again and again and again. The key to it is, if a company makes mining promises, whether it's to the local community, a territorial government, local First Nation, whatever, get the money up front. You know, it's especially if it's a large multinational, you know, they can afford it. If they say they're going to build, housing, a new school, whatever it is, solar farm, get the money up front and then sign the agreement. But often it's just promises that when the money runs out, the company disappears and nothing happens. There's quite a few academic articles on this, the socioeconomic impacts. There's also some rather disturbing films. I'll see if I can dig them up and I'll send a list over to Emily, and you can then spend a very depressing evening watching them.
Okay, thank you.
One tries to be cheerful in this line of work. It's pretty hard, I must admit.
Yeah, I can imagine. Oh, okay.
Anyone else? Oh, okay, good. That's great. I'll send this slide presentation off to Emily. If you can then fire it around to your various absentee cohorts, and I'd be more than happy to answer questions through email, telephone, whatever. And if you have any stamp collections kicking around the basement, send them my way. I'll be more than happy to take them.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was amazing.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome. Okay, thanks so much. Okay, I don't quite know how to get out of this.